Good morning, you are watching AnewZ. I'm Katie Wilson. Here are the top stories. 14 injured in Russian drone attack on Kharkiv, the day after fatal drone bombardment. The US is partially evacuating embassy staff from Iraq amid rising tensions in the Middle East. Dozens have died in flooding in South Africa, with the death toll expected to rise. Ukraine's Kharkiv was hit by a fresh wave of Russian drone attacks overnight, just a day after a deadly bombardment. This follows the previous night's assault that killed 3 people and injured more than 60 others. At least 14 people were injured in last night's strikes, including 4 children. The drones targeted residential neighbourhoods, damaging homes, schools and vehicles and sparking fires. Ukrainian officials condemned the attacks as deliberate targeting of civilians and called on the international community to increase pressure on Russia to stop the violence. Leaders from across Southeast Europe have travelled to the Ukrainian port city of Odessa on Wednesday, a city repeatedly targeted by Russian missile strikes, in a show of unity with Ukraine.
Слово має президент України Володимир Зеленський.
Welcome everybody.
For the first time, leaders from across Southeast Europe gathered in war-scarred Odessa to send a unified message. Ukraine is not alone. And for Serbian President Alexander Vučić, it was his first ever visit since Russia's full-scale invasion began in 2022. Leaders from 12 countries reaffirmed their support for Ukraine's sovereignty and European future.
Odessa is a very important city for all of us, and not just a symbol of southern Ukraine. It's a crossroads between northern and southern Europe, so between the Balkans and the Caucasus, and between European stability and the threats to undermine it. And Odessa has always been a gateway, and today it stands as a gateway to our shared security.
The leaders signed a joint declaration which demands Russia's full withdrawal, an end to hostilities and peace. It also urges the international community to stop all forms of aid to Moscow's war effort. But Vučić stood apart. While reaffirming Serbia's respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity and offering to help with post-war recovery, he did not sign the declaration, objecting to the call for sanctions on Russia. Belgrade has, however, condemned Moscow's policies in the United Nations and expressed support for Ukraine.
Serbia will always remain very faithful to UN Charter, international public law, which includes our support to territorial integrity to UN-recognized countries.
All eyes now on whether the summit will deliver more than just symbolism and bring Ukraine any closer to peace.
US President Donald Trump's decision to deploy troops to Los Angeles has ignited political and public backlash as protests over immigration raids continue.
Large crowds gathered again on Wednesday evening in downtown Los Angeles for a peaceful protest that later spilled into the city's streets. Carrying banners, posters and flags, demonstrators chanted slogans and listened to speeches before marching in unison through nearby streets.
Are you ready to stay in the streets? Yeah! I want to say to each and every one of you, you are not alone. The world is watching Los Angeles.
Wednesday marked the 6th consecutive day of protests in Los Angeles over President Donald Trump's immigration raids. While largely peaceful, some demonstrations have seen violence. Officials say the Marines and National Guard deployed at the city are tasked with protecting federal personnel and property during immigration and customs enforcement raids and related protests. Asked about reports of protests spreading to 17 other US cities, President Trump pushed back, focusing instead on the situation in Los Angeles.
I can tell you that what we have is a situation in Los Angeles that was caused by gross incompetence. They didn't have the police to handle it. The police were asking us to come in. They were very late. We had to go in to save a lot of ICE officers, as you know, who were held up. They were holed up in a building and they were being attacked. And the military went in, the National Guard went in and got them. The police weren't able, unfortunately, to move fast enough, but we moved fast enough. And while we were there, we stayed there, and we stopped tremendous destruction and death.
Meanwhile, federal prosecutors in Los Angeles have filed criminal charges against 2 protesters accused of throwing Molotov cocktails during earlier demonstrations.
We are looking at hundreds of people. We have video, we have FBI collecting video, we are collecting body cam, we're collecting social media, we're collecting everything. And we're going to take our time, we're going to identify people. They think the mask is saving them, it's not saving them.
The demonstrations began on Friday in Los Angeles and have mostly remained peaceful, concentrated within a few downtown blocks. However, confrontations with law enforcement have grown increasingly tense since the military deployment. Trump has vowed to step up deportations and bolster ICE operations, setting a daily goal of 3,000 migrant arrests, a move critics say targets vulnerable communities and fuels public unrest.
In our last Inside Politics talk show, Anastasia Lavrina discussed the complex situation of the LA protests with Mark Myrovitz, a professor at the State University of New York Maritime College. Mark explained the rationale behind using armed forces to handle the riots, claiming that the police cannot manage the protests effectively.
The point is that Los Angeles is a chaos zone. There's violence, there's looting. There's this unbelievable situation, fires, burnings. His focus is really incorrect. He's focusing on his dispute with the president on who has jurisdiction to send in the National Guard, instead of figuring out how to quell this situation. I should mention quickly that when the fires were raging in Los Angeles not so long ago, Trump worked with Newsom and they sent in the National Guard, and they really needed the help. The bottom line question is, can LA's police handle this? And he keeps talking about arrests and full extent of the law prosecutions. They asked the Attorney General of California in a press conference yesterday, how many arrests have you made? And the Attorney General said, I don't know, ask the sheriff. So the bottom line is the LA police is not capable of handling this. Recently, or some time ago, there was a rooftop party in Los Angeles which got out of hand to such an extent that people started throwing Molotov cocktails off the roof, and the police couldn't handle it. So the question here is, what should we focus on? Bringing this to an end, this riot to an end, or debating the constitutional issues, which, by the way, I'm a lawyer. Whatever the courts decide is the law.
President Trump has expressed willingness to extend the 8th of July negotiation deadline for completing trade talks with countries, as he expressed content over the outcome of the US-China talks earlier this week.
United States President Donald Trump has expressed satisfaction over the trade agreement reached with China. This comes as officials from both countries met in London earlier in the week, as both sides seek to de-escalate trade tensions. The talks focused on critical economic issues, including U.S. access to Chinese rare earth minerals and magnets, and China's access to U.S. technology. The U.S. president has also indicated that he would be willing to extend an 8th of July deadline for completing trade talks with countries before higher U.S. tariffs take effect, citing progress in negotiations with some 15 countries.
Would you be willing to extend the deadline for trade talks with these countries?
I would, but I don't think we're going to have that necessity. We made a great deal with China. We're very happy with it. We have everything we need, and we're going to do very well with it, and hopefully they are too. Well, we're dealing with Japan, we're dealing with South Korea, we're dealing with a lot of them. We're dealing with about 15 countries, but as you know, we have about 150 plus. And you can't do that. So we're going to be sending letters out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, to countries telling them what the deal is, like I did with EU.
Meanwhile, Germany has welcomed the China-US agreement and hopes negotiations between the United States and the European Union can progress in a similar way.
I expressly welcome it. This is not at the expense of Europe. Rather, it is another conflict that has been resolved. I expressly welcome that. And I very much hope that we will also succeed in reducing and, if possible, eliminating the trade conflicts with the Americans in a similar way.
The US and China have been engaged in an economic standoff after Trump announced sweeping tariffs on imports from a number of countries earlier this year, with China being the hardest hit. The Asian country responded with retaliatory levies. The proposal from the London talks still needs the approval from both leaders before it can be implemented.
The European Union, as well as 5 other nations, have lobbied against new US national security tariffs on imported commercial aircraft, warning of a risk to supply chains and ticket prices.
5 countries, the European Union, and several major airlines have urged the Trump administration not to impose new national security tariffs on imported commercial aircraft and parts. Airlines and aircraft manufacturers have been lobbying US President Donald Trump to restore the tariff-free regime under the 1979 Civil Aircraft Agreement that has yielded an annual trade surplus of $75 billion for the US industry. Since April, airline companies are paying a 10% tariff on imported planes and parts. The US Department of Commerce also started an investigation whose aim is to check if imported parts are a risk to national security. If this is the case, the American government will increase the tariffs even more. Mexico said in 2024 it exported $1.5 billion in aircraft parts, just a tenth of the total, to the United States. The EU said it took US exports of aircraft worth roughly $12 billion, while exporting about $8 billion of aircraft to the US. Countries including Canada, China, Japan, and Switzerland have expressed concerns about the potential fallout from such tariffs on the global aviation industry. The Chinese government said in a statement that no country should attempt to support the development of its domestic aircraft manufacturing industry by suppressing foreign competitors. Delta Airlines has warned of the tariffs' impact on ticket prices, aviation safety, and supply chains. Meanwhile, the United Auto Workers Union, which represents 10,000 aerospace workers, said it supports the tariffs on domestic production quotas in efforts to safeguard the entire aerospace supply chain across the commercial and defense sectors.
The World Bank is warning of a significant global growth slowdown, citing President Trump's tariffs as a major cause. In its latest report, the bank forecasts the slowest growth since the 60s.
World Bank is forecasting the slowest decade of growth globally since the 60s. In its latest global economic report released on Tuesday, the bank trimmed its global growth estimates to 2.3% in 2025, down from the 2.7% forecast made in January. The report cites escalating trade tensions, rising tariffs, and ongoing uncertainty in the global policy direction. It describes the widespread situation as turmoil, caused by trade barriers and slowing investment activity. It says, without swift action, living standards could suffer deeply. The report says that nearly 70% of all economies worldwide have had their growth expectations cut since the last forecast 6 months ago. Advanced economies are projected to expand by just 1.2% in 2025, down from 1.7%. For emerging markets and developing economies, the forecast has been trimmed to 3.8%, a 0.3 percentage point drop. The United States is expected to experience a significant slowdown, with growth revised down to 1.4% in 2025, nearly 1 percentage point lower than previous estimates, and just half of the 2.8% growth seen in 2024. The Euro area and Japan are both forecast to grow by 0.7% next year, falling 0.3 and 0.5 percentage points short of earlier projections, respectively.
We are expecting global growth to slow to 2.3% this year. This will be the slowest pace since 2008 outside of global recession. While we are not expecting a global recession, the outlook remains sobering. If our forecasts materialize over the next 2 years, the first 7 years of this decade will register the weakest growth rate since 1960s.
The outlook for 2026 has also been revised downward to 2.4% from 2.7%. The report cites US tariffs, introduced under Trump, as a major cause of the slowdown. The World Bank emphasized that while a modest recovery is expected in 2026 and 2027, global output is still projected to fall significantly short of earlier projections. However, China is one of the few major economies whose growth forecasts for 2025 and 2026 remain unchanged. And recent US-China trade talks in London this week has raised hopes for easing tensions and stabilizing the economic global scenery.
The United States is partially evacuating embassy staff from Iraq amid rising tensions in the Middle East. The move follows warnings that Israel could soon launch a military operation against Iraq, a development that officials fear may trigger retaliatory strikes on American targets in the region. Oil prices jumped more than 4%, while the Pentagon says Iran is edging closer to developing a nuclear weapon, a claim Iran denies. Military families across the Gulf are also being offered voluntary departure as Washington braces for possible escalation. Pakistan has announced it's increasing military spending by 20%, just weeks after a short armed conflict with neighbouring India. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more details from Peshawar.
Pakistan is shifting its economic priorities sharply, boosting military spending by 20% following last month's deadly border clash with India. In its 2025 and 2026 federal budget, the government has allocated nearly $9 billion for defense, up from around $7.5 billion last year, despite slashing overall federal spending by 7% to $62 billion. The shift follows the most serious confrontation between the nuclear-armed neighbors in nearly 3 decades. The fighting, triggered by an Islamist attack on Hindu tourists in Indian-controlled Kashmir, escalated into 4 days of cross-border strikes involving missiles, drones and artillery. India accused Pakistan of backing the militants, an allegation Islamabad denies. Pakistan is also trying to meet tough conditions under its IMF loan program while facing new economic uncertainty, including the threat of US import tariffs, critical given America is Pakistan's largest export market. The government projects 4.2% growth, 7.5% inflation and a 3.9% budget deficit. But with rising regional tensions and economic headwinds, those targets may be hard to hit. As military spending climbs, Pakistan faces growing pressure to balance defense with economic recovery. Tamim Bahis in Peshawar, Pakistan for AnewZ.
At least 49 people have died in severe flooding in South Africa's Eastern Cape, including several school children. Homes have been destroyed, schools damaged, and rescue teams are still searching for those missing.
Torrential rain and heavy snow have devastated South Africa's Eastern Cape province, leaving at least 49 people dead, including 4 school children.
4 learners are still missing, that are still being looked for. Our rescue teams are on the ground. The rest of deceased people are citizens of different ages. Search and recovery operations are continuing across all affected areas, particularly within the OR Tambo District Municipality.
A bus was discovered abandoned on a riverbank near Mthatha, with several children still unaccounted for, as rescue teams continue to search the area for survivors. Across the province, homes have been destroyed and hundreds left displaced. Residents now face a humanitarian crisis amid the worsening winter weather.
If my child had not been crying, it would have been worse. We are heavy sleepers. If he hadn't cried, we would have not woken up. His cries sprung me to action because I couldn't understand why even his pacifier could not make him stop crying, and that's what helped me see what was happening. When I stepped outside, all the houses around us had been ruined and submerged. We were the only ones alive.
The floodwater woke me up in the morning, between 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. The water pushed the door, the water rushed into the house, moving the furniture around. The fridge, the TV and gas stove were all swept away. I couldn't grab any of these things, so I just had to save myself.
More than 100 schools have been damaged across 2 provinces, and nearly 500,000 homes left without power. President Cyril Ramaphosa is calling for calm and unity. As recovery continues, people are bracing themselves for more severe weather ahead.
Hawaii's Kilauea volcano has erupted again in a spectacular display, the 25th episode since December, sending lava fountains soaring up to around 100 metres high from its north vent. The eruption began late Tuesday morning and intensified rapidly, sending glowing rivers of molten rock across the crater floor. Volcanologists say this is part of an ongoing eruptive cycle, with short, intense events followed by brief periods of quiet. No communities are currently at risk as the activity remains contained within Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Authorities warn of dangerous gases and volcanic smog and are urging visitors to keep a safe distance from the crater rim. Poland's pro-European government won a vote of confidence in Parliament on Wednesday, securing 243 votes in favour and 210 against. The vote comes just days after Prime Minister Donald Tusk's ally lost the presidential runoff to nationalist Karol Nawrocki on the 1st of June. The defeat sparked tensions within the ruling coalition and raised questions about the government's stability. Tusk said he hopes the vote will restore momentum for his cabinet. Hundreds of taxi drivers from all over France stopped traffic in Paris on Wednesday. They are protesting against a new pricing system for medical transport that will, they say, lower their income and create unfair competition.
Hundreds of taxis blocked the A6 motorway into Paris as drivers from across France joined the protest. They oppose a healthcare transport reform set to take effect at the beginning of October. Government wants to set a flat fee of €13 per trip for taking patients to medical appointments, plus extra charges per kilometre. These trips are paid for by the National Health Insurance. In 2024, France spent about €6.7 billion on medical transport. Of that, €3 billion went to licensed taxi drivers. This amount has risen by 45% since 2019. The reform aims to save money by limiting payments for waiting times and trips without passengers. Taxi unions argue that while savings are necessary, the current plan puts their jobs at risk and fails to consider the impact on rural drivers.
I've been a taxi driver for 32 years, and working conditions have only gotten worse. And now we've reached the end of the line. They're not bringing us to our knees. They're bringing us to the ground. That means that, come October, if the agreement passes, we'll sell our companies. They'll be worthless. Our employees will be laid off, and our careers will end like this.
Talks between the government and taxi unions were held last week, but ended without a deal. With blockades still in place and the Ministry of Finance targeted next, drivers say they are not backing down. They are determined to keep the pressure on until their concerns are heard.
Azerbaijani Air Force pilots concluded a set of training flights. The pilots performed takeoffs and landings as well as complex flying and combat maneuvers at low and medium altitudes. The exercises aim to improve their combat skills. Azerbaijan's Prime Minister Ali Asadov met with his Uzbek counterpart Abdullah Aripov in Tashkent. The two said that bilateral trade grew by 41%, with more than 10 joint projects in the works. They welcomed closer cooperation within the Organization of Turkic States and discussed a joint green energy route to Europe. Azerbaijan thanked Uzbekistan for building a school in Fuzuli. The day before, Uzbekistan's President Shavkat Mirziyoyev met Azerbaijan's Prime Minister for talks on strengthening partnership between the countries. The Russian Foreign Ministry has accused the European Union mission in Armenia of spying on Yerevan's neighbours. The ministry spokesperson said the staff of the EU mission are spying on on countries neighbouring Armenia, adding that they don't report to Yerevan or contribute to regional stability. The ministry also criticised what it called NATO's influence in the South Caucasus, saying it brings no security and only fuels regional tensions. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico visited Kazakhstan this week, where he met with the country's president during a two-day trip. According to the host, Astana is eager to expand exports of oil, gas and uranium to Slovakia. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico visited Astana for talks with Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, focusing on strengthening economic ties. In 2023, trade between Kazakhstan and Slovakia reached $140 million, with over 30 Slovak companies and 22 joint ventures active in the country. President Tokayev highlighted Kazakhstan's readiness to export oil, gas, uranium, food and more, while expanding cooperation in energy, engineering, agriculture, digitalization and tourism. He also invited Slovakia to join the Trans-Caspian International Transport Corridor project. Fico showed a particular interest in nuclear energy and oil. The visit concluded with agreements on diplomatic trading, agriculture, energy cooperation, and joint defense investments, particularly in ammunition production and modernization of Soviet-era armored vehicles. This marked Fico's second Central Asia visit during his current term, following a strategic partnership deal with Uzbekistan. Slovakia is now the third European Union's country after France and Hungary to forge such close ties in the region. Uzbekistan also seeks Slovak expertise to expand its automotive industry, aiming to double annual car production by 2030. Fico also promoted cooperation in nuclear energy and labor migration, noting Slovakia's shortage of 150,000 skilled workers in industry, automotive and healthcare. Plans are underway for a Kazakhstan-Slovakia business forum and a new strategic partnership modeled on the Uzbek agreement. Fariza Kalimurzina, AnewZ in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Georgia's Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze visited Budapest for talks with his Hungarian counterpart Viktor Orban and other high-ranking officials on Wednesday. For more on the visit and its goals, we go to Tbilisi and our correspondent Nini Nikolaishvili.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze has begun a two-day official visit to Hungary, signaling a renewed push to strengthen bilateral ties. The visit kicks off with a formal welcoming ceremony at the Hungarian Prime Minister's Palace in Budapest on June 11, followed by a one-to-one meeting between Kobakidze and his Hungarian counterpart Viktor Orban. The talks will expand beyond symbolic, moving into practical cooperation as the members of both cabinets engage in bilateral negotiations. High on the agenda, agriculture, energy, culture, innovation and sports, sectors where both nations are seeking for closer ties. The visit will also host the second session of the Hungary-Georgia Intergovernmental Commission. This key platform is expected to bring several new agreements and create a platform for evaluating progress in joint initiatives. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze is also set to meet Hungarian President and the Speaker of National Assembly, further cementing a high-level political dialogue. Speaking to Georgian journalists, Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze underlined Hungary's enduring support for Georgia's statehood and its European integration, calling Budapest a special ally. He also emphasized the importance of using the opportunity to broaden cooperation not only politically but across the vital economic areas too. Joint press conference with the two prime ministers will follow the commission session, likely highlighting shared priorities and evolving nature of this strategic partnership. It's Nini Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, AnewZ.
We're done for now, but don't go far. Stay tuned for more and have a wonderful morning.